Welcome to Mach 10 Sports. Glad you could join us. Just was thinking the other day, 10 years in today's time goes by a lot faster than you imagine. I mean, when you were a little kid, kindergarten through high school, how long were the weeks? How long were the months? How long were the years? Now 10 years goes by like just a flash in the light, very quick than what we were normally to when you were younger. But it got me thinking, the next decade in the Southeastern Conference is going to look very different than it ever has before. First, you already have two new teams coming in the league in Texas and Oklahoma, and that changes the league from a financial standpoint. Reports have stated that member schools could start seeing up to $70 million annually each from the SEC. The 14 teams in the current structure of the SEC receive $54.6 million annually from the SEC right now. So as things stand, we're guaranteed to have some kind of change in the SEC moving forward within the next 10 years. At a bare minimum, from a financial standpoint or a money standpoint, we're going to see some kind of change. Then if you really want to get honest, the two blue blood programs coming into this league now have had their struggles, but both are bringing in blue blood brands that are going to bring some changes. And naturally, when you bring in two big money makers like that, and with the tradition they bring to the field, you're going to have some changes in the conference when you move to 16 teams. But from an on the field standpoint, the last third of this 2022 football season in the Southeastern Conference will have the biggest impact on the next decade in this conference, more so than any season that I can remember in the last decade. I'm being honest. I can't remember this late in the year, really in the past decade, where you've had so many meaningful games still to be played, still to be determined in this league. Because, I mean, we'll get into it. You have the Alabama, and they've had a stranglehold on the SEC West. We'll get to those statements, those comments in a minute. And you've had Georgia, who's been on their recent run really since 2017. And a lot of times it felt like at least one of them. Georgia probably a little more than Alabama because the East has been a little bit down in their time when they've taken over the division. But even going to Alabama, you always felt like one of them almost was like a win away the first week in November. Now, fast forward, and we got Tennessee, Georgia, November 5th, LSU, Alabama, November 5th. I mean, you got two driver's seat games in the Eastern and Western divisions coming up in the SEC. So it just got me thinking. I mean, what is it going to look like in the next 10 years in the SEC? You have a team like Tennessee that is starting to showcase what it is capable of and has the potential to emerge as a consistent threat year in and year out in this conference. Tennessee starts to replicate things. And when we go back to the 90s to an extent, you start looking at the success that Tennessee and Philip Fulmer and his Tennessee ball teams had in the 90s, it only increases the league's value, the SEC's value. Tennessee is one of the true blue bloods in the SEC, but it's been asleep, as we all know, for the last 14 years. So when Tennessee is good in the SEC, it helps the league out as a whole. I know some nationally have kind of gone back and forth on social media from a national standpoint. Does it help college football if Tennessee's good? I have my thoughts on that, but I can damn well tell you it impacts the SEC. It really does, especially the SEC East race. And then when they start playing crossover games that they do with Alabama every year. Transitioning over, though, but you have another team in their own division that we talked about a minute ago that is the reigning national champs and has controlled the majority of the Eastern Division since 2007, minus 1 year in 2020 when Florida won it. And Georgia's showing no signs of slowing down. So you got to factor that in. You got Tennessee moving up in the pecking order. Georgia's not going anywhere. They're just getting the thing started. Kirby Smart has built a very similar to machine that his former boss in Tuscaloosa, Nick Saban, has built. The difference is Kirby Smart is 11 years younger right now than Nick Saban was when he first got to Alabama in 2007. I think Nick Saban was 57 years old when he took over that job in the beginning of 2007, if I remember correctly. So think about it. Kirby is 11 years younger. And like I said, I don't see that train slowing down anytime soon. I mean, can you imagine Kirby Smart going another 15, 20 years at his alma mater? And just so you know, I've heard things from people that I don't think Kirby Smart goes that long, just with the way things are in college football and it's more 24/7, 365 than it's ever been. I don't think he goes that long. I think he wants to have his success and move on right off to the sunset. That's another conversation for another day. I don't think he goes that long, but I mean, it doesn't matter if he goes another 10, 12 years. Things aren't slowing down in Athens right now. You also have two teams in South Carolina and Kentucky. Still have a lot to play for in this 2022 season, the last third, to determine how some things could shake out here in the next couple years. I mean, you got South Carolina, Kentucky that if they finish a straight season strong, will take some momentum into this offseason and back-to-back years for both these programs. And it helps them gain traction with not only the high school recruits, but it helps them somewhat become a transfer portal destination in this new era of college football. You also got to think that, and you also got to have that in the back of your head. You're also always trying to impress those 2 to 3 classes you're recruiting in the future. But now, the free agent side of things, you have to be a destination for those kids, especially at certain positions. And also, hey, at the end of the day, kids may be a little different now, but still, everybody wants to win. So if you're consistently winning and you're doing it with transfer portal kids and you have a track record of developing kids that have came from other programs, you're going to continue to get those kids because there's proof in the pudding. Like I said, two teams can make a living in the transfer portal destination. You aren't going to compete for a division year in, year out if you're Kentucky and South Carolina. But if you can go consistently start trying to win 8, 9 games, that kind of changes the trajectory of your program. That's what Kentucky's been doing. But also, they got South Carolina on their heels now. You need to keep that rolling. Two teams that could really help themselves moving here into kind of the new era of college football, the new era of the SEC. Jump into the other side. Let's go out west. Let's go to the West. Jump into the other side of the league. You're still in the middle of a round-robin tournament currently between Alabama, LSU, and Ole Miss to determine who's going to represent the SEC West in Atlanta this year. I mean, I know Ole Miss looked bad this past week against LSU, specifically in the second half. But they still have to play Alabama, and Alabama's got to go to Baton Rouge. I mean, like I said, going into last week, it's a round-robin tournament with those three teams right now. And no matter what happens this year, all three of those programs are in great shape and look to contend for the SEC West in the future. With that being said, though, these last few weeks of the 2022 season, the last third of the season, is going to tell us how much of a stranglehold Alabama still has on the SEC West and on the conference as a whole. LSU would be in the driver's seat of the SEC West with a win in Baton Rouge next week in Brian Kelly's first year. What an incredible feat that would be. I mean, it's incredible where he is right now. I said the goal going into this season should be to get to the 8-win total, sign a good class, figure out the holes in your personnel and your roster, plug those with some transfer portal kids. And I'd call that a great first season for Brian Kelly down in Baton Rouge. And if they were somehow to get to Atlanta in his first season, that would be the best season for a first-year coach probably, you initially probably say ever, but honestly probably since 2013 with Gus Malzahn, when they had the biggest turnaround at Auburn from their 2012 team that didn't win a conference game to winning the SEC West in 13, winning the SEC, and then going to play for the national championship. It'd be tough to beat that unless they obviously got in the playoffs somehow with 2 losses, won it all, etc. But still, a very impressive feat if that were to happen. Again, I already think it's pretty impressive. Ole Miss still has a chance of winning 10 games in back-to-back seasons, which seemed like a crazy feat just a few years ago as Lane Kiffin got their first 10-win regular season last year. Their first 10 wins in the regular 12-game season they've had in years. Kiffin and the Rebels can just win 2 out of the last 4. That would be a 9-win season in a supposed rebuilding year. And that's very possible if they can just keep the injury bug away. They could lean on there would be proof at that point that transfer U can work, and they can actually springboard that to be like, hey, you know what? This isn't a bunch of shirts. This isn't just a saying I come out and post on social media. We say it around the entire state. We run the SIP, come transfer to the SIP. It's not that anymore. We show we can have success. We won 9, 10 games back-to-back years, and one of the teams we flipped the entire roster and won 9 regular season games, maybe 10 with it. So there's proof in the pudding from that. You just like the trajectory of all 3 of those programs. I don't think Alabama's slowing down by any means. LSU's trajectory is through the roof right now, and so is Ole Miss, I think, right now. And I know I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. We're going to stay in the West, but I just want to fast forward just a second. Let's go to the future. Let's fast forward to the future. Preface this by saying Alabama may win the West the next 5 years in a row, and that would not shock me. Saban rides off of the sunset. God, won the last 6 out of the 7 SEC Western Division titles. It could have happened. But I think for the first time in a long time, the 2023 SEC West race will be the most open that it has been going into a football season in a very long time. Alabama loses a lot. They do. They lose. They have lost a lot. This is the first real time you feel like they may start getting consistently challenged year in, year out. And they may not ever go in another run where they win it 3 years in a row. And there's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't mean they're failing. It just means more ships are rising. It's just what it means. There's more parity around the league. There's teams throughout each division that are getting better. And specifically for the West, like we just mentioned, LSU and Ole Miss are starting to become consistent threats to them year in, year out. And going back to the next few weeks here in the SEC, there's a lot at stake. I keep saying that in regards to the changing of the guards and potentially seeing some new arrivals to the party on a more consistent basis. And what I mean by that is you're not always going to see Alabama and Georgia the first Saturday in December in Atlanta. You're just not going to consistently see that as much anymore. So I think you got some teams that have kind of started peaking, showing, hey, we're going to be competitors year in, year out. Will Georgia and Tennessee consistently start having heavyweight fights for the SEC East every year? I mean, they are this year. I mean, it's possible. Tennessee loses some next year. Georgia will lose some, but it looks like Georgia's still ahead in the SEC East, but it could start being more of a fight than it has been the last 5 or 6 years. Is it possible in today's ever-changing game that it is going to benefit the blue blood programs that have been down for a while and are hungry for success? Example, Tennessee, the transfer portal is only going to help them year in, year out now. NIL, their fan base is starving for success. They want to win an SEC East. Maybe not this year. They'll be fine with that. I think they're satisfied with their season the way it's looking to shape up. But at some point, they're going to want to start winning the East over Georgia. And I think they're desperate to do that. But I also think the transfer portal, Josh Heupel on offense is going to be able to plug and play kids. He's proved it. Virginia Tech wouldn't even play Hendon Hooker. Look at Hendon Hooker, didn't even start at Tennessee last year. Comes in now, he's the leading Heisman candidate, in my opinion, right now. So the transfer portal is always going to be good to Tennessee. The bare minimum offensively it will be. They will be able to get good players out of their transfer portal, and they'll get good high school players. And I think they got some good coaches on the defensive side of the ball that'll help. Again, you have success. People want to transfer to a winning program. Is anyone going to start consistently contending with Alabama in the West? Before we wrap this up, Alabama's won the West 7 out of the last 10 years, going back to 2012 through 2021. There's been some one-hit wonders, Auburn in 2013 and 17, and then LSU in 2019, but no one has been able to consistently compete with it within the division year in, year out with them. That being said, if Alabama were to go drop one in Baton Rouge or in Oxford the next few weeks, that would go a long way in determining how tight Alabama's reign still is on the SEC West. I think it's getting a little slimmer, and again, that's not a slight towards Alabama. That's just more of a compliment to the LSUs, the Ole Misses of the world that are catching up. Maybe you could sneak in. Maybe you could get an LSU win in the West one year and then Ole Miss back to back, then Ole Miss right after that. I just don't know if we're at that point we're going to go see Alabama roll off back to back 3 years in a row anymore. I think we're kind of to that point, which is good overall for the league. I just like to wrap up, though, by saying by no means do I think Alabama's run is over or that Tennessee is taking over Georgia and the SEC. I'm not saying that at all. I just think that they're going to be tougher. To win these divisions now, it's going to be tougher, and that's great for the conference. But this does seem like for the first time in the Alabama dynasty era and during the current Georgia run, that there seems to be more ships on the horizon ready to consistently compete with those two on a more regular basis. With that being said, again, I cannot remember the last few weeks, final third of the season, meaning so much still left to be determined, so many games with so many implications that not only are going to have lasting effects on this season, but really to set us up here for the next decade of the Southeastern Conference and help us welcome in 2 new programs in Oklahoma and Texas. And obviously, like I mentioned at the beginning of this segment, it's going to help us financially. But at the same time, the league's only getting better. These ships are starting to rise, and everybody's starting to rise with it. But as Brian Kelly said this past week, remember, October is for pretenders, and November is for contenders. I appreciate you joining us on this segment of Mach 10 Sports. Have a great week. Keep following us on Mach 10 Sports for the best information on SEC sports.